Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. I'm Janice Kaminer-Resnick, and it's my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of our leadership team, which includes former Congressman Mel Levine and former Los Angeles County Supervisor Zev Yaroslavsky. Thank you and welcome to our very special guest tonight, the extraordinary Secretary Leon Panetta, and thanks also to our moderator. We are so grateful to both of you for being with us tonight. We hope to learn from you. We know we will. About the state of our chaotic world. Reminder that again next week we are hosting two programs, but next week the 2 days are Wednesday and Thursday. On Wednesday, September 4th, Max Boot will discuss From Reagan's GOP to Trump's MAGA, Where Are the Republicans Headed? That'll be interesting. And on Thursday, we will host two Stanford scholars who just completed an epic report on anti-Semitism on college campuses, Larry Diamond and Jeffrey Kosoff. They will discuss the disturbing findings from their study and what should be done about anti-Semitism and anti-Israel bias on college campuses. I want to remind you again that all of our programs are available via podcast and via our YouTube channel, and of course on our website. Links to all those access points are in all the emails I send, or you can email me and I always respond, or at least I always try to respond. I want to wish you all a very happy Labor Day weekend with your families and friends. Hope you enjoy an extra day off. Now, to introduce our guests formally and our guest and our moderator, please welcome my colleague and friend, former Congressman Mel Levine, who to this audience needs no introduction, but just got a very short one. Mel?
Thanks, Janice, very much. I am especially pleased to again introduce Leon Panetta to our audience. I actually first met Leon 60 years ago when we were both young and we were both Republicans. Since then, Leon has had a spectacular career during which he has been a superb public servant in numerous positions, contributing to our country in countless ways. Leon initially worked for the moderate Republican senator from California, Tom Kuechel. He then became assistant to the Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare in the Office of Civil Rights and focused on civil rights, leading to his leaving that position because his views were different from those of the administration. And after that, he became executive assistant to the liberal Republican mayor of New York, John Lindsay. He left Mayor Lindsay, returned home to his beloved Monterey, where he enjoyed the ocean and practiced law, and became a Democrat. And in that capacity, he ran for Congress and had a superb and highly respected congressional career of 16 years, where he chaired the Budget Committee. After he left Congress, he became director of the Office of Management and Budget in the Clinton administration, then White House Chief of Staff for President Clinton, Director of Central Intelligence of the Central Intelligence Committee, and also Secretary of Defense, and subsequently, to top it off, CIA Director for Barack Obama. Since leaving government, he has chaired the Panetta Institute, again back in Monterey. His speech last week at the Democratic Convention was classic Leon, clear, straightforward, and powerful, in explaining to the country the importance of our alliances and of supporting Ukraine against Putin's aggression. I thought his remarks at the convention were a master class in American patriotism. He was as clear then as he was 60 years ago, but to a somewhat larger audience. And I'm really delighted that he will be speaking with us for the next hour. I'm also delighted that he will be interviewed by the wonderful Patt Morrison, who is very well known to our audience and needs no introduction, so I will make mine brief. She's a writer for the LA Times and has been for decades, and an acclaimed radio journalist on NPR stations for decades. She's the recipient of 6 Emmys and 6 Golden Mike Awards. These awards just keep coming. Last year, she was recognized as the Distinguished Journalist, receiving that award from the LA Society of Professional Journalists for Greater Los Angeles. And I turn the floor over to our beloved Pat.
Mel, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who's joining us this evening. If you've joined us before, you know that you can put your questions in the Q&A, and later in the program, we will get to put some of them, many of them, I hope, to Secretary Panetta. And I very much thank Secretary Panetta for joining us this evening. Welcome back. You've been here before, and we're glad to have you back again.
Thank you very much, Pat. It's a real honor to have this opportunity. I want to thank Janice and thank my good friend Mel. Our friendship does go back 60 years, and we also served in Congress together, but we continue to work with one another on issues that we care about. So thank you, and thanks to your audience. You know, this is a great organization that provides the opportunity to people to be able to look at the many issues that confront us in our democracy. And the key to a democracy is an informed public, and that's exactly what all of you are about. So thank you for joining us today.
Well, Mr. Secretary, people who didn't get to see your speech on the last night of the convention can see it online. There was a lot of buzz earlier in the day about a big special guest who was going to be speaking at the convention. The rumor was that it was going to be Beyonce. Was she just detained and she asked you to fill in for her?
Well, you know, that rumor was happening on the floor of the convention as well. And very frankly, I was kind of looking forward to seeing Beyonce. But that never happened. And, you know, they introduced me, and I guess an Italian had to take her place.
And well done, too. We're going to get to some of the elements in your speech a little later. There was news today that I thought was important to talk to you about, especially since you are an Army veteran and had been Secretary of Defense, that Donald Trump and a film crew went to Arlington National Cemetery. He laid a wreath to honor the 13 Americans who died in 2021 in the evacuation of Afghanistan. And then he posed at a gravesite with the family of one of those people in Section 60, which is an especially hallowed section of Arlington National Cemetery. And the law says that you cannot campaign, you cannot use any campaign material, you cannot pose for campaign photos, do anything politically related in our national military cemeteries. And there was, by all accounts, a confrontation with an Arlington official and members of the Trump campaign who essentially, as far as we can tell, pushed or shoved and verbally assaulted this staff member from Arlington. And so these pictures went out on the internet of Donald Trump with a thumbs up at the gravesite with the family of one of these soldiers. What do you make of this, and what sort of response should it engender?
Well, for those that didn't watch my speech, I expressed a great deal of concern about the president's attitude towards those in the military, and particularly our veterans. And it's pretty clear that he's called them both suckers and losers. And at the time he was at Normandy, did not want to go to the cemetery to pay tribute to those that were buried there from World War II. So bottom line is he's always had a bad attitude with regards to the things that we hold dear. And look, Arlington is, in my book, a very special and a very sacred place, because we bury our men and women in uniform there who've given their lives for this country. And there are very strict rules at Arlington. As Secretary of Defense, I had responsibility for Arlington, and I can tell you that there are very strict rules, that there are not to be any kind of campaign or political events at Arlington. And somehow, obviously, Trump decided he was going to do this. There's no question that it was a political campaign event. And so from my point of view, he violated the rules and the laws that are involved with Harlington. But I think it just adds to the argument that he really doesn't have a great deal of respect for those that serve this country in uniform. And he basically does not know that the most important thing we have in this country is our respect for those that gave their lives for our country. So I just think it makes the point that Donald Trump, frankly, doesn't deserve to be president.
You've got a 20,000-foot view of international relations and American politics, so I want to go into that a little more. The 20th century was unquestionably the American century, and now there are questions about whose century the 21st century is going to be. We saw during the Trump administration a straining of NATO alliances and other alliances, and even 4 years of fence mending by President Biden. And even if Donald Trump loses this election, there will still be questions on the part of our allies about a country that not only was able to vote for Donald Trump once, but may have come close to electing him again. So is the rest of the world recalibrating its relationship with the United States as maybe not the formidable leader and defender of democracy that we have been for 100 years?
Well, I often tell my students here at the Panetta Institute that in the 21st century, this country can take one of two paths. I honestly think that we could be a nation in renaissance. We have a very strong economy. We have tremendous innovation and creativity. I see it up here in Silicon Valley all the time. I think young people can be trained to have the skills that are going to be needed in the 21st century. I really believe that we have a chance to try to do better in terms of trying to protect our climate and protect our people. I think that Republicans and Democrats must ultimately learn to work together in order to govern our country. And frankly, the United States has to be a world leader in a very dangerous world. We could have that kind of country. I honestly believe that. But we could also be a country in decline if we allow our hate, our fears, if we allow our discrimination to consume us. We could lose our democracy. And we could go the way of past empires in history. What happened with past empires is that ultimately they lost the kind of leadership they needed in order to maintain the strength of that empire. If our leadership is not strong, we could lose it as well. So the key right now is to understand that in a dangerous world that we live in, it is very important for the United States to exercise world leadership. And frankly, if the United States doesn't exercise world leadership, nobody else will. So a lot of countries are asking the question, if Trump is elected, will the United States represent that kind of leadership? Problem is, Trump's made clear that he's America first. He's isolationist. He wants to withdraw from our alliances. He wants to withdraw from the world. And ultimately, that's something we know this country tried to put in place in the 1930s before World War II. And it was wrong then, and it's wrong now. And so a lot of people from abroad that I've worked with in various capacities have indicated to me their concern about Trump being reelected and what he would do to damage the position of the United States in the world. And it's for that reason that it is extremely important that we elect, obviously, a president that understands that we have to be a world leader. We have to build alliances. We have to support those alliances. We have to be able to do everything we can to confront autocracy in the world. It's the only way we're going to save democracy in the 21st century.
In your convention speech, you quoted Ronald Reagan saying that isolation never was and never will be an acceptable response to tyrannical governments. But are our allies, our NATO allies principally, are they recalibrating? Are they saying, well, okay, plan B, if this happens, here's what we have to do to protect ourselves, to strengthen ourselves in the absence of a strong America?
Well, there's no question that they are looking at that possibility because they want NATO to remain. It is one of the most important alliances we have going back to World War II. As a matter of fact, I give credit to NATO for our ability to ultimately win the Cold War and bring down the Soviet Union, because NATO remained one of the strongest alliances in the world. And obviously, NATO has really performed a very important role in pulling together in a united way to help support Ukraine in confronting the Russian invasion. So NATO is extremely important to the security of Europe, but in many ways, the security of the world. If the United States pulls away from that, then these countries, our allies, are going to have to continue to work together to make sure that they maintain NATO and keep it in place for their own security. Their worry right now is that if Trump is elected and then pulls back and then supports Putin in Ukraine, that the message that will go out to the world is that the United States is not going to stop Putin from going into other countries as well. As a matter of fact, Trump said Putin can do whatever the hell he wants in Europe with regards to NATO countries, and the United States will stand back. That's a hell of a message to send to our European allies. So I don't think it's going to happen. I think the American people are smarter than that, and that they ultimately know that our security is dependent on our being a world leader and supporting alliances like NATO.
Let's talk about some specific areas of the world. You mentioned Ukraine. What is it that the United States should be doing for Ukraine right now, and what's stopping us?
Look, the most important thing is that the United States and NATO continue to provide the weapons, the ammunition, the air defense systems, the missiles that are absolutely critical to Ukraine being able to defend itself against Russia. I believe, in addition to that, that frankly, Ukraine ought to be given a little more room to be able to use those weapons as they see fit in dealing with Russia. They've now made an incursion into Russia. I think it's an important step that they took to try to make clear to Russia that Russian territory is not going to be holy territory, not when they can throw 200 missiles and drones at Kyiv and at Ukraine, that the Russians are going to have to pay a price for that. And that's what they're doing. So I think it is very important right now, because Ukraine forces are stretched. Let's face it, they're stretched between trying to protect against Russian advances in Ukraine and at the same time develop this incursion into Russia. And so they desperately need to have the weapons that we provide, the ammunition, the support, the training that is essential to their ability to basically defend their country. Look, we cannot afford to have Putin succeed in Ukraine. If he succeeds in Ukraine, then the message that goes to Xi and China is, go ahead and go into Taiwan. Go ahead, Putin, go into other NATO countries. And it is a message that really undermines democracy in the world. And so it's absolutely essential that the United States and NATO do everything we can to make sure that Ukraine succeeds in defending itself. that I believe is absolutely essential to our ability to maintain credibility in a very dangerous world.
We saw Donald Trump effectively kill a bipartisan border deal using his supporters in Congress. Is the same sort of thing afoot with Ukraine?
Well, I worry about that. I worry that, look, right now, I think there is a strong bipartisan Republican and Democratic support for maintaining our support for Ukraine. But if Trump becomes president, there's no question he could use that leverage to basically try to push Republicans in the direction of backing off and withdrawing from Ukraine. That's a reality. He was able to get them to vote against a bipartisan deal to try to strengthen the border situation. I find it incomprehensible, frankly, as a former elected member in the Congress, that if there's something that's right for the country, you don't vote against it because some damn candidate tells you that he wants to have an issue rather than solving a problem. That's crazy. But it happened. It happened. And if that happened, I think Trump could very well convince Republicans in the Senate and the House to back away from Ukraine, in which event, as I said, it would be a clear signal to the world that the United States is truly withdrawing from our leadership role.
What about Israel and Hamas, which seems to be, we've used the Vietnam metaphor, light at the end of the tunnel. Literally, we have tunnels, but we have the United States trying to strike a delicate balance. At the same time, we also have the Vice President Kamala Harris talking about her concern for the innocent victims in Gaza here. What tone can the U.S. strike? What should the United States be doing on each side on behalf of it, and to try to move forward with any kind of talks to resolve this?
Well, first and foremost, just based on my experience at the CIA and at the Pentagon and in Congress, there is a strong and a bond that can never be broken between the United States and Israel. I think, we've supported Israel and their right to exist, and we have to continue to do that. At the same time, obviously, we have to work with Israel. We've got to be able to try to see if we can find ultimately an approach that can bring some kind of peace to the Middle East. And it's important to work with Israel in that effort. I mean, right now, we're involved in what I would call a very dangerous stalemate in the Middle East. Israel is facing almost a four-front war right now, dealing with the threat in Gaza and trying to deal with getting rid of the final elements of Hamas in Gaza, dealing with the West Bank. They just had to go into the West Bank because of their concerns that that terror attacks were being developed within the West Bank. Thirdly, dealing with Lebanon and Hezbollah, which conducted a fairly strong attack against Israel, and Israel continues to try to strike back and protect itself from further attacks from Hezbollah. And then Iran. Iran has threatened to strike because of what happened in terms of the killing of the Hamas leader in Iran. So it's a four-front war right now. And at the same time, Hamas has made clear that they're developing, they developed a bomb attack in Tel Aviv that went bad. But the fact that they were planning to have that kind of bombing in Tel Aviv tells you that they remain still a very big threat to the security of Israel. And add to that, they continue to try to disrupt and continue to try to undermine stability there. So where do we go? Where do we go? I would like to believe that at some point, both sides understand that we do have to achieve some kind of ceasefire in order to be able to gain back the hostages that are still there and still alive, in order to provide whatever assistance is necessary for the victims of this war, and in order to try to develop some kind of governing and security approach to what happens in Gaza. We're going to have to take that breath. We're going to have to be able to pause in order to do that. Now, obviously the United States is pushing to try to move in that direction, as are other Arab countries, as well as other allies. Netanyahu, at one point indicates agreement to move forward, but then, he looks at his right-wing government in Israel and is very concerned that if he accepts any kind of ceasefire, it might be the end of his government in Israel. And at the same time, Hamas continues to resist accepting any kind of ceasefire. So the two key players here are not accepting some kind of ceasefire. I know there'll be continuing pressure from the United States and others to try to get that to happen. I hope, frankly, that at some point we can go back to Saudi Arabia and get Saudi Arabia to take an important step in becoming part of the Abraham Accords, recognize Israel, try to provide some support to the Arabs, to the Palestinians, so that they can govern in Gaza and hopefully develop a Palestinian state. I think Saudi Arabia could be an important ally in that effort. But right now, we are in a stalemate on all fronts. And frankly, that's not good, because at any day, you could have a terrible mistake, a terrible misjudgment that puts us into a larger and more expanded war in the Middle East. That's the reality we are living with right now.
I'd like to ask about China, which has been making headway all over the world in different ways. In Africa, it's been putting people there to work in exchange for extracting a lot of the natural resources in Africa, putting itself on the ground. It's been pushing and pushing in the waters offshore from China. It's been harrying Filipino ships. It's pushed Hong Kong and violated the agreements it made with Hong Kong when that handover was effected in 1999. It seems like everything is working with China to kind of get the world to look elsewhere, to get the world on side with China for some action against Taiwan.
No, look, there's no question that Xi has been making an effort to operate kind of below the horizon. Everybody's focused on Ukraine, everybody's focused on the Middle East, and China continues to pursue its goals with the Belt and Road Initiative, trying to develop ports, trying to develop support in other countries, and trying to build up its military, investing a great deal in a much more expanded military. And it continues, obviously, to say that ultimately Taiwan has to become part of China. I think it's very important for the United States to deal with China from strength. I don't think any more than we could deal with Russia from weakness, we can't deal with China from weakness. We have to deal with them from strength. What does that mean? It means that we have to make very clear to China that that they cannot invade Taiwan, and that the United States will support Taiwan in defending themselves. And we ought to make clear to them that the South China Sea doesn't belong to them. The South China Sea is an international area, and we're going to continue to send our Navy vessels through that area. I think we also need to build up our alliances. We are strengthening Australia. So Australia is now getting nuclear subs to be able to defend itself from China. We need to build other strong allies in that part of the Pacific in order to be able to send a message to China that we are going to stand strong together in opposition to China's aggression. At the same time, if we can draw those lines and make very clear what they should not do, I think we have to continue to have a dialogue with China. We certainly need to have a dialogue on economic issues, on trade issues. We need to have a dialogue with regards to other areas, cyber, that are important for us to be able to work and try to find ways to cooperate. But we have to do that from strength. And I think the United States has to be willing to invest more in Africa, in Latin America, in Central America, and in all those places where China is trying to find a place to be able to lock themselves in. We've got to show them that we can compete. I regret, frankly, that Trump threw the TTP agreement out the window. That agreement was very important to our ability to develop trade with other countries in the Pacific and create a market that China would not be a part of. We threw that out the window. That's too bad. But I really believe that we have to learn to compete with China, not just from a security point of view, but from an economic point of view as well, if we're going to be able to provide the kind of leadership that's necessary.
Given how parlous a state we are in with relations with China and looking down the road, one of our viewers, Stuart, says if the U.S. chose not to contest a Chinese blockade of Taiwan, is it not reasonable to expect South Korea and Japan to develop their own nuclear deterrence, as you referred to Australia beefing up its own nuclear submarines?
Yeah, no, I get that question every time I go to Korea as to whether or not they ought to have weapons themselves in order to protect that area. I think the strongest alliance we have in that part of the world is the one between Japan, South Korea, and the United States, particularly in confronting North Korea. We haven't talked about North Korea. North Korea is another one of those countries that is developing a nuclear stockpile, that's working on missiles, and that represents a real threat to those countries and to the Pacific and to the United States. And so it is very important that we have a strong alliance there in which we are working together to defend that area. We have troops in South Korea. We have our destroyers that are in that area. We are working with the Japanese. We're working with the South Koreans. The fact is that the United States does have a nuclear capability. And we've always made clear to North Korea that if they decide to use a nuclear weapon, that we would respond in kind, and made very clear to them that that would be the end of their regime. I think that is a sufficient deterrent right now in order to be able to protect South Korea from that threat.
About 20 years ago, Mr. Secretary, the Pentagon was already preparing for climate change from a defense point of view. We've been talking about diplomatic matters, strategic matters, military matters, but in fact, climate change is going to create problems that touch on all of those, with refugees, with shortages of resources. There's a film called The Day After Tomorrow about climate change, and one aspect of it which catches your attention is that Americans have to move south to avoid the cold, and so we agreed to relieve the debt of Latin American countries in order to allow people from the United States in. And today in the Middle East, there were indices of heat above 150 degrees in the Persian Gulf. So are we taking our eye off the ball there? The Pentagon may be ready, but what about the rest of the country and our planning when it comes to climate change, both for our domestic purposes and globally?
Well, obviously, climate change not only represents a threat to life, it represents a threat to security. When I was director of the CIA, I developed an office at the CIA that would focus on climate change and climate impact as a security threat, because it is. And I did the same thing when I became Secretary of Defense, is established an office there that would also focus on the security threat coming from climate change. And it is very real. I mean, the fact is when climate is impacted, it can produce the kind of migration that takes place that moves populations from one place to another, that in itself could represent a threat to security in those countries. The rising seas are a threat to our Navy bases, to our military bases, and to our ability to be able to provide security to those areas that are going to be impacted. Look, the Northern Passage is an area where if China and Russia are able to take control of that area, our security is going to be impacted by virtue of the melting of the Arctic ice and the ability to have this Northern Passage. So you can look at a myriad of potential threats that are going to come out of climate change, and we've got to be prepared to deal with that. So it's not only the issue of obviously what are we going to do to deal with climate change itself and try to move this country towards cleaner fuels in the future, but we're going to have to prepare ourselves from a security point of view from the dangers that are going to develop as climate change continues to impact areas and create, the kind of droughts and hunger situations that again represent a threat to security. It's happening in Africa now as we speak. It's happening elsewhere. And it's something we have to pay attention to if we're going to deal with the security threats that are part of climate change.
Mr. Secretary, I have one more question for you before we move on to our viewers' questions, and that is that you spent time in the legislative branch. You were at the heart of the executive branch. 50 years ago, we saw a Supreme Court rebuke President Nixon over claims of immunity, and now we have a Supreme Court that has extended this mantle of immunity out for Donald Trump, going to some of the support for a unitary executive, a very powerful presidency, an imperial presidency, as it's been termed. What do you see about down the road, the dangers of that and the prospects of what might happen?
Well, my approach to that is that it is unacceptable in a democracy, and we have to fight legally and we have to fight legislatively to make sure that that we do not have a dictator as president of the United States. And the way to do that is to challenge what the Supreme Court's ruling is all about. And that's frankly what the special counsel did in looking at the charges against Trump for January 6th and redoing it to be in compliance with what the Supreme Court stated, and yet maintain the charges that have to be maintained against the president for what happened on January 6th. So I think it's, look, in our system of democracy, our forefathers designed a system in which they did not want a king, they did not want a king parliament, and they did not want a star chamber court. So they developed three separate but equal branches of government, each a check and balance on the other, in order to make sure that power would not be centralized. That's what was the basic design of our Constitution, was to ensure that power would not be centralized in any one branch of government. And we, over 230 plus years, we've done a pretty good job in terms of making sure that that never happened. We've got to continue to work at it. We've got to continue to fight it. We've got to continue to make sure it does not happen. Why? Because frankly, our Constitution requires that we do that, requires that we maintain the strength of all three branches and the ability to check the others so that we do not centralize power. So I haven't given up hope. I don't particularly like what the Supreme Court is doing, but on the other hand, I'm also a lawyer, and I really do believe that lawyers can carry on a strong battle here to make sure that we do not surrender our rights to this court or any court.
So let's get to our viewers' questions. And Mr. Secretary, we treat this like batting practice or like speed dating. So we can get brief answers to some of them and move on to the next. On the part that we were just discussing, David from Boston wanted to know about the speculation that Trump could, if reelected, order the military to intervene in domestic disputes, protests, etc., and under the guise of invoking the Insurrection Act. How much of a prospect do you think that actually would be, given your experience with the military and with civilian government?
Well, I believe very strongly that our military leaders have their first loyalty to the Constitution and not to the president. And they know it. You know, Trump did try to have the military get involved in the demonstration in Lafayette Park. The military was there. They understood that they had been, frankly, misused by the president and made a decision not to do that again. Every military officer I've talked to, has made very clear that the military has to perform the role that the military was designed to perform, which is to defend this country from foreign enemies, not to use the military to threaten our own citizens, not to use the military to round up millions of immigrants, the way Trump is talking, that would be an abuse of the use of the military. So I think, frankly, that the military will not obey an order that they believe is not constitutional.
We have a couple of questions too about Ukraine, whether keeping up this war, the support of Ukraine in the war, also effectively degrades Russia's conventional military capabilities, maybe even undermines its economy, and thus Putin's stranglehold on the government.
Oh, I don't think there's any question that that what Ukraine has done here is to weaken Putin, weaken him as a leader in Russia. I mean, there was a point where there were troops that threatened to basically bring down Putin, and went a long way to almost accomplishing that. I don't think Putin has the strength that he once had. I don't think his military has the strength that it once had. I think it's deteriorated as a result of this war. Obviously, you know, there's literally thousands of Russians who've been killed in this war. Russia has not been honest about the number of casualties they've taken in this war, but it's pretty clear that they haven't been able to replenish a lot of those that were killed. And so I think in many ways that the longer this war goes on, the weaker Putin becomes. Look, Putin only understands one thing. Let's be clear. Putin only understands force. We can say pretty please. We can hope that he would negotiate, but the only way he's ultimately going to come to the table is if he believes he's going to be defeated. And that means we've got to continue to support Ukraine.
And he's not there yet.
He's not there yet.
A lot of questions about the Mideast. Let me see if I can find this. Basically about how Netanyahu has chosen to wage this war, with whose interests at heart, and his exit strategy versus a legitimate exit strategy, I think is the word somebody used.
Well, look, I think Netanyahu obviously wants to defend and protect the survival of Israel. I think he's dedicated to that. I think Netanyahu is also dedicated to his own survival. And when he says things like we're going to, totally wipe out Hamas, it bothers me because for all of us that are familiar with the Middle East, he's never going to totally wipe out Hamas. But he can wipe out the leadership of Hamas that was involved in the attack on Israel. And I think that's what he should do. I believe he's been trying to accomplish that. But to say over and over again that it's about totally destroying Hamas, I think then creates a goal that frankly is not going to be achieved. I think he ought to be more realistic with the fact that right now the goal is to go after the leadership of Hamas and get rid of those that were involved in the attack on Israel. That's doable. And it may not be doable today or tomorrow, but I can tell you, knowing the intelligence capabilities of Mossad, that ultimately it will happen. And I think, frankly, Netanyahu ought to make clear, this is not going to end tomorrow. It's going to be a continuing effort to make sure that Hamas never again conducts that kind of attack on Israel. And at the same time, I think Netanyahu has to recognize that he's got to respond to the people of Israel. It isn't just a question, and I know he's got a right-wing government, and they're putting a lot of pressure on him not to agree to any kind of ceasefire. But ultimately, if he really is going to protect his own legacy, he's got to listen to the people of Israel who are saying, come on, let's have a ceasefire, let's get the hostages back, and let's try to develop some kind of approach to Gaza that can be meaningful in the future and protect Israel in the future.
Matthew says, on the other hand, Hamas seems to have no incentive to lay down its arms because its leadership views the deaths of civilians as a benefit. So how to bring about an end from that end, from bringing Hamas to the table?
Well, you would hope that Hamas would come to the table, but very frankly, it may require that we ultimately get rid of the leadership of Hamas in a way in which they are not around. We had to do that with Al-Qaeda. When Al-Qaeda attacked our country on 9/11, we went after the leadership of Al-Qaeda and we got them. We undermined them. And Al-Qaeda never was able to come back again. I think that's what Israel has to do to Hamas.
Can you assess, because you've got the long view here, the state of the risk of cyber warfare? There's a disequilibrium of Russia. We talked about this yesterday, a kind of second-rate country that has first-rate bombs and has fielded, instead of great soldiers in Crimea, it's fielded these server farms of people throughout its allied nations who sit there in basements and try to destabilize the United States, persuading Americans that America is bad, to turn on ourselves, to undermine us economically with hacking. Are we addressing that threat enough, and are we smart enough to get ahead of it with our own technology? And you're a Silicon Valley guy. Where's Silicon Valley in helping us to do this?
Look, I believe cyber war is the battlefield of the future. It's actually becoming the battlefield of the present, but clearly is going to be the battlefield of the future. Using a sophisticated virus that is planted in our infrastructure. Iran planted what's something called the Shamoon virus in Aramco oil. They destroyed 30,000 computers. They shut down Aramco oil. If you take that same kind of sophisticated virus and apply it to our infrastructure, to our financial systems, to our banking system, to our transportation systems, you can shut down this country. That's a very real threat using cyber warfare. And frankly, while we have some defenses, I don't think we have developed the kind of strong defense against cyber attacks that we should. And to do that, very frankly, you need to have a strong public-private partnership. The private sector is getting hit with cyber attacks every day. But oftentimes they don't share that information with the public sector. We've got to be able to share information. We've got to be able to build better defenses. Look, the Pentagon has a good defense. The CIA has a good defense. Most departments in the federal government don't have a strong defense with regards to cyber attacks. So we are going to have to develop a stronger capability. We're going to have to train more people who understand cyber and how it's used. If we're going to be able to defend this country, it's going to take a lot more than what we're doing now.
There's a lot of hostility in Silicon Valley, it seems, to the government, in spite of some pretty, sweet regulations that were put in place very early on in the existence of the internet. Why cannot these companies, these leaders, be enlisted in this effort more aggressively?
Pat, I think that's what has to happen. I mean, I look back when I was director of the CIA, and I had very close relationships with the companies in Silicon Valley and Southern California and elsewhere, mainly because I kept it quiet, I kept it confidential, and I kept it classified. And I think if we could rebuild that kind of classified approach to the relationships we have with companies, that we might get more cooperation from them when it comes to helping to defend us.
One of our viewers wants to know whether you think Kamala Harris is up to the job, especially internationally.
I think she is up to the job. And the reason I say that is because, I know her. I knew her as a prosecutor. I knew her as Attorney General. She is a prosecutor at heart, but she's a pragmatist. She is not an ideologue. And because of that, it means that she is going to listen to people that know more than she does. And very frankly, one of the key things about the presidency, and I've had to serve as, I've had the opportunity to serve as chief of staff to the president, and obviously worked in the Obama administration as well. One of the most important aspects of any president is the ability to bring good advisors in that know more than you do about the issues that have to be confronted, and be willing to listen, and then ultimately to the ability to make the right decision. Look, in the end, the president has to make the decision, but to get there, just like a lawyer preparing a case for trial, you've got to build the evidence. You've got to look at the issues, and you've then got to make a decision how you approach it. She has those abilities. And just like Ronald Reagan did, I thought, damn well as president of the United States, former movie actor, he did it because he had good people around him who gave him good advice, and he was smart enough to take that advice.
And we saw Donald Trump actually say that he didn't trust the kind of intelligence that he was getting from the United States.
Yeah, no, I thought one of the worst things I thought he said was to stand next to Putin and say to the world that he trusted Russian intelligence more than he trusted our own intelligence. I couldn't believe that a president of the United States would say that, particularly alongside an adversary.
You and Mel Levine, as we heard at the beginning of the program, started as Republicans and ended up as Democrats. Where is that kind of America that worked together to a common end and figured out ways to do it without demonizing and despising the other side?
Well, I think it is very important for this country to get back to two strong political parties that share many of the same values. They may have differences on issues, but understand that they have to work together to govern our country. I've often said in my over 50 years of public life, I've seen Washington at its best and Washington at its worst. The good news is I've seen Washington work. When I've been back to work with Kuechel, it was Tom Kuechel on the Republican side, Jacob Javits, Clifford Case, George Aiken, a number of moderate Republicans who were willing to work with Democrats. When I got elected to Congress, Tip O'Neill was the speaker, Democrat, but he had a great relationship with Bob Michel,
And with Ronald Reagan.
And with Ronald Reagan. And so they were willing to work together on issues, and we got things done. That was the Congress that I was part of. It's become very divisive. It's become very partisan. And very frankly, we lost a lot of the center that is so important to the ability to govern. We elect people not to go back to Washington to pound their shoe on the table. We elect them to go back there to govern. And ultimately, we've got to get back to that if our democracy is going to survive.
Real quickly, though, why did that change?
It changed for a lot of reasons. Part of it was redistricting, creating safe seats for Democrats, safe seats for Republicans. And so Republicans worried about people running to their right. Democrats worry about people running to their left. And so more people started moving to the extremes. Secondly, it was a great deal of money now in politics. And very frankly, special interests are not particularly interested in making waves. And so that's another problem. Thirdly, it's the media, which focuses not on people working together in our democracy, but on people confronting one another. And social media has even made a greater difference in terms of people being divided in the information they're receiving. And lastly, leadership. I tell my students that in a democracy, we govern either by leadership or crisis. But you need leadership that is willing to make tough decisions, to take risks, decisions that might very well offend your own party. But if they're the right decisions for the country, that's what you have to do. We've got to get back to that kind of leadership because frankly, in the last few years, we've been governing largely by crisis, and that's no way to govern in our democracy.
Secretary Panetta, we like to conclude with some optimism. So maybe you've got a happy riff to give us as we let you go, and hope you will join us again.
Yeah, look, I really do believe in American leadership. This country's faced a lot of crises throughout our history: civil wars, recessions, depressions, world wars, and somehow we've always found the right leadership, and we've been able to move forward. I believe that can happen again. I've looked into the eyes of our men and women in uniform that were going into battle, and I saw young people that were willing to put their lives on the line for this country. We need to have a little bit of that courage in the people we elect, to understand that they have to have the courage in order to be willing to govern, to find consensus, and to protect our democracy. My hope is that ultimately we'll find the right leadership that will protect us in the future.
I think it was Abraham Lincoln, and I'm paraphrasing him, who said that the United States would never be brought to grief by a foreign enemy, that it would be our internal, our domestic dissension that would do it. Is that your concern as well?
No, without question. I think what happened on January 6th is a real wake-up call. To have a mob attack the Capitol of the United States and almost bring down our democracy tells us how fragile we are. So we do need to develop that kind of leadership. What I try to do here at the Panetta Institute is to do my best to help develop a new generation of leaders for our country that are willing to take the risks that are required in order to protect our democracy.
Secretary Panetta, thank you for this hour and for a semester's worth of education and insights into what's going on in the world. I hope you'll come back and talk to us again.
Thank you, Pat. I really do enjoy this, and really want to pay tribute to your audience for their willingness to listen, and hopefully to be able to develop a sense of hope that if we stay involved, if we the people stay involved, that ultimately we can be the most important check and balance in our democracy.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and thanks. I'll echo my thanks to the audience as well for watching and for supporting these really vital programs. You see the next one's coming up on the screen. Max Boot with Warren Olney, Larry Diamond, and Jeffrey Kossoff with Larry Mantle, and so on through the end of the month, on to September, and in through the election. So please stay with us and keep watching. Thanks very much.